Okay, great. So in the interest of time, we'll get started today, and hopefully some more folks will join as we start up. So it's great to see everyone, and welcome back, and thanks so much again for joining. So we're here for the second part of a two-part workshop on gender equality in capital markets. And as we start, please feel free to introduce or reintroduce yourselves in the chat. We do have a busy schedule to get through with the content, so we'll get started, and we'll make sure you have resources as well as we go through. I want to say a big thank you to SIX Swiss Exchange for hosting. It's a collaborative effort as the training was developed with IFC, UN Women, Columbia University, and supported by the Luxembourg government. For those who missed part one, you can find it on the SSE event page for this event, and we will share it as well in the chat throughout the training, the link to that page. And this is also where you can find the resources I mentioned, as well as the handouts for today's session. Now, to kick things off, please let me introduce Luana Schuler, Engagement Manager for UN Global Compact Network of Switzerland and Liechtenstein, will provide some opening remarks. So I'll turn it over to you, Luana. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Landon. Let me just quickly share my screen, and please just let me know once you can see the presentation. Can you see it, Landon?
No, we can't. Could you try resharing, please?
Sure, just a second.
Okay, we can see your slides now.
Okay, so thank you so much, Landon, and also Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative, for giving me the opportunity to present the UNGC network, Switzerland and Liechtenstein. So some of you might already know that the goal of the UN Global Compact is to make companies aware of the relevance of ESG issues to their core business and to support them in implementing the 10 principles along, their strategy along the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. And to achieve this, we provide a range of capacity building programs, training sessions, peer exchanges, and networking opportunities to really help companies conduct business responsibly. And our local network here in Switzerland and for Liechtenstein, we are currently able to support over 350 business participants with our programmatic activities. And we actually have a good balance between larger companies, but also SMEs, as you can see on that slide. Our focus areas of our network are, of course, the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact, but we also address key ESG topics such as environmental issues like climate, biodiversity, just transition, social issues and concerns like human rights, child labor, or living wage, and of course, the governance topic as in anti-corruption. And in addition, we place a strong emphasis on sustainable supply chain management across those ESG topics and also sustainability reporting. And our idea really is that wherever you are on your sustainability journey as a company, you will find the tools and opportunities to help you accelerate your progress. All our programs are offered free of charge once you pay an annual contribution. And last year we hosted around 120 activities across our focus areas. And I would just like to share at this point as well that almost all of our programs are in English, as we have participants from all linguistic regions of Switzerland. Last but not least, just a short preview of some of our upcoming webinars and events. So you can see we really organize a variety of engaging in-person and online events with a focus on capacity building, knowledge sharing, but also a lot of informal networking opportunities. So if this is something that would be interesting for you or your company and you would want to learn more, please head on to our websites, or you can always contact me, and you will also find those slides on the event page that Lyndon mentioned in the beginning. So thank you so much for listening, and have a great workshop. Back to you, Lyndon.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Luana, for that overview. Some really cool work being done there. So before we continue on, just a couple housekeeping items. So of course, the same as last time, it will be a live facilitation for about 2 hours. We'll have the live Q&A, so the same as last time. So please ask questions there so that we can keep track of them easily. We have the chat, and then we also have the mentees and a couple of polls. So just like last time, there is some active participation, and it's a smaller group. Your participation would be fantastic. And then, of course, we will tell you a bit more towards the end, as you may be wondering about certificates or certification. So we'll share a bit more about the feedback survey, but we do recommend finishing the homework that we give you before completing the feedback survey. Please note that the feedback survey, if you can complete it within 1 week of today, that would be appreciated. And if I wasn't clear on the certificate piece as well, you do need to complete the feedback survey in turn to receive the certificate. Now, today, I'm joined by my colleague Fiona for the session, and of course myself, and we're also fortunate to have the SSE Academy head, Tiffany, online as well. But for this session, Fiona and I will be leading it. So thank you, Tiffany, as well. We're also joined by some more guests, partner UN Women with Maya Lofstrom from Women's Empowerment Principles Secretariat. So thanks so much for joining us, Maya, and you'll hear more about the WEP and their work in a little while. We're also joined by Paul, Sustainable Finance Manager from Luxembourg Stock Exchange, who will chat a bit more about some gender indices and bonds. And then we'll also be joined by Sabina, Head of Market Advocacy and Education at Brightmind, a little later on as well. Now, as a reminder, the course we're undertaking has 4 modules, which have been developed to walk you through 4 steps for improving gender equality performance for global markets. Today, we'll be focusing on the second 2 steps, which are implement and communicate. So this is building off of what we learned last session. So hopefully you're all able to join us for the last session. As mentioned earlier, if you weren't able to, there is the recording posted on our website. An important note here is that this is an ongoing process. So once you've started communicating on your gender equality performance, this doesn't mean you're done. There's continuous work to be done on this topic. So like many sustainability related topics, there's that constant process of improvement and refinement. And while we're presenting these steps in order, in reality, it's likely you'll be working on all 4 steps in unison. In terms of learning objectives, we have 2 main objectives for our training, which we hope you're able to achieve in our 2 hours together. First, we'd like to help you understand how to capture market value for gender equality performance, be that through gender smart investment strategies or through the creation of gender-focused financial products. And second, we would like to help you today to identify the guidelines you can use for communicating gender-related information with stakeholders and to know what information investors are looking for in corporate reports. This final objective will then be continued on where in our second module, where we'll also look to conduct an exercise with Bloomberg to see how this disclosure is then also being used in market indices such as Bloomberg Gender Equality Index. So a brief overview of the agenda. To achieve these objectives, we've planned for about 45 minutes for each of the 2 units that we're covering today. as well as a short 5-minute break, some introductory comments, of course, and a time to share resources and answer any of your questions remaining at the end. And we'll do our very best to stay on time in today's session. Now, we want to pop up this Menti. How much do you already know about GenderLens investments and disclosures? Okay. Okay, perfect. So to start, what's your current level of comfort with this topic? So you should be able to scan the code or enter the code at the top, or I believe we've shared a link as well in the chat. We'll give it a few more seconds for some more answers. Okay, so we see folks aren't totally comfortable yet, and that's absolutely understandable. And we hope with the session today, we can increase your comfort with this topic a little bit more. Now let's just test one more knowledge question. If we can go to the next Menti, thank you. Okay, we have our fun little animation here of some participants. So if you'd like to join, please do so. Okay. Let's continue on to the next knowledge question. And so the question is the objective equity or equality? What do you think? This is coming back to some of what we learned last time, and we'll run through a brief overview to refresh you in a minute. But let's see some answers here. So is the objective equity or equality? Okay, so fairly split, almost evenly split. So a decent amount of folks answered equity, a decent amount answered equality. So equality is the objective, but let's review why this is the case. So if you give me 1 second here, I'll switch back to the slides. Okay, so you probably remember this Venn diagram from last time, but what does equality really mean? So as a reminder, what we discussed here is kind of that example of how DEI plays out in a boardroom. So diversity is ensuring that multiple identities are represented, such as sex, gender, culture, race, ethnicity, religion, age, disabilities, and more. And diversity is having that seat in the boardroom. Well, equity is about recognizing and reorganizing power distribution. So it's about being able to speak. So think of it as providing a microphone to those who are quiet or not speaking. Last but not least, we must ensure inclusion, and that's ensuring that every individual feels welcomed, giving them equal opportunity to connect, belong, and grow and contribute to the organization, advance their careers, and feel comfortable and confident being their authentic selves. So we can also say that inclusion is like having interpretation or headsets that allow everyone to understand each other and feel welcome. So if diversity is counting people, inclusion is making people count. We'll continue to review the impact. So last time we focused on 2 key areas, preparation, where we set the groundwork for understanding key terminology, the business case and human rights case, and we looked at how the world is doing so far in terms of gender equality in corporate leadership. you'll probably remember all those tables that we showed you about, percentage of CEOs on board, or percentage of women CEOs and board seats, etc. So as a reminder, we learned that improving gender equality provides many benefits to society and the economy beyond the boardroom or corporate environment. For example, we saw that studies have shown that gender equality can decrease violence in society, increase economic productivity, and also increase resilience against financial and environmental crises. Now, just as a reminder, what we did not say was that I mixed up. It's important to remember that it's the equality part that does have such an impact. Excuse me. So let's also remember that increasing equality in corporate leadership has also been found to create important benefits, such as increased profits, increased transparency, and improved environmental impacts. And now we'll do a brief review of the WEPs. So we learned about the UN Women's Empowerment Principles and shared with you how you can use those principles to get started on enhancing gender equality. And as a reminder, the 7th principle, measurement and reporting, was highlighted as one of the key principles. We'll be discussing more today on how to get started with public disclosures, but remember, there's more information to be found in the WEPs, and Maya will chat more with us about that later. Another element we wanted to review, we didn't have time to cover this slide last time, or very high level, is on the action points you can take regarding corporate culture. So you may remember the slide came after our activity that I ran through last session about the fictation companies Owl Inc. and Peacock PLC. So as a reminder, we found that corporate culture played an important role in making sure we were setting ourselves up for success. However good the intentions are, if we don't take into consideration the corporate culture and the barriers preventing improved equality, we won't achieve our objectives and will waste money or even make the problem worse. So a few actions to flag here include providing gender sensitivity training for HR staff and managers to ensure a fair recruitment process and enhance diversity. That's the chair for our boardroom example, giving folks a seat at the table, instigating policies aimed at providing equal opportunities for advancement that enhance equity for employees. That's the microphone of our example, and doing research to identify those barriers, such as external gender pay gap reports, which you'll hear more about later from Sabina, and to enhance inclusion, which is, as mentioned, the headset of that boardroom example. And of course, this all requires effective communication from the top to institutionalize the desired corporate culture. With that, let's transition to the 3rd unit, which looks at gender lens finance and the market mechanisms that can support the principles we discussed last week. And for that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Fiona.
Great, thanks so much, Landon. So now as we're moving into new content for the session, we're going to be looking at the implement pillar of the structure that we have. So when we're looking at this area, we're going to be talking about products that support market action. And we'll also look at mechanisms that will add value and promote gender equality in markets. So firstly, we'll be looking at how financial products are being used to support gender equality and what opportunities lie within those financing mechanisms for gender-allied companies. So to get started, we'll look at the trends we're seeing in sustainable finance more broadly. So this chart, which you can find in the latest UNCTAD World Investment Report, shows that in 2022, the total number of sustainability-themed funds worldwide increased, although the rate of growth had slowed a little bit since 2021. But the total now stands at over 7,000 funds, up 18% from 2021. And these funds are worth a total of around $2.5 trillion US. And so we do see in 2022 a decrease in the global net investment flows towards sustainable funds. But it's important to also note that this decline was a result of depressed asset values and investor withdrawals amid some market uncertainties, such as high inflation, interest rates, and poor market returns, and of course, the potential looming recession risk. So as such, the growing trend in sustainable investing is very much still set to continue and increase. And we're also seeing a significant growth in gender lens investing. However, the data on gender lens investing is a little bit more difficult to measure, and we have a less of a clear idea of the exact magnitude of funds that consider these factors. So whilst we don't have enough time today to dive fully into this topic, we've provided some extra slides on this in your handout materials as well that you can access from our webpage. So if it's something that you want to look into a little bit further, please do make sure you look at that extra content as well. So what is gender lens investing? You might be asking yourself that firstly. So let's just take a moment to pause and discuss that. It would be great if you could share with us in the chat what you think gender lens investing is, and then we'll come on to a more official definition. So if you take a moment to have a think about that, and it'd be great if you could share in the chat what your definition would be for this concept. So I'll just give you a moment to have a little think about that. Please don't be shy as well. I will be waiting here until we get at least one attempt. So please do share. Oh, I'm sure someone has an idea. Yeah, that's a good point from Tiffany. Even if you don't have a fully formed definition, does it bring to mind any keywords, any reactions? So just share whatever comes to mind for you. Great. So yeah, Tiffany says women-owned businesses for sure. And then we have Tumi, who's shared gender lens investing is an investment strategy that integrates gender-based factors into financial analysis and investment decisions. It aims to generate both financial returns and positive social impact by advancing gender equality, supporting women-led businesses, or addressing issues that disproportionately affect women and girls. Well, that's a fantastic definition to me. No wonder you were typing for a few seconds there to get all of that down, but that's a really comprehensive view. Kristen's shared investing with a deliberate focus on gender, which could be investing in women-owned businesses, products which improve women's lives, gender equality, etc. Brilliant, yeah. And Stephanie says, I think it's an investing approach taking gender into consideration. Absolutely, that's at the core of this. So thank you guys. I think there's some really good thoughts in all of that, which capture a lot of what I think we would include in the definition. So I'll now move on to an official definition of that we're drawing from the Global Impact Investing Network. So the GEIIN define gender lens investing as investment strategies applied to an allocation or to the entirety of an investment portfolio, which seek to examine gender dynamics to better inform investment decisions and or intentionally and measurably address gender disparities. So of course, as the name gender lens investing makes clear, gender is a lens, a way of seeing that helps an investor to highlight opportunity, illuminate risk, and understand strategy in a more nuanced way. So thanks for sharing your thoughts, because I think you've captured a lot of similar concepts there, and even perhaps expanded on that definition as well. So with that established, we're now going to look at how investors are using that gender lens to make investment decisions. And there are many different strategies that our investors are using here. So some of the core strategies we see look specifically at what focus an investment strategy with a gender lens takes. Often we'll see a combination of multiple of these strategies, though, to varying degrees. So the most common strategy you might be familiar with is a focus on leadership. So, percentage of women on boards or in leadership positions, etc. But other areas that we see investment strategies focusing on are employees, supply chains, products and services, and also community. So at a firm level, fund managers can drive the adoption of a gender lens or gender smart investing by starting with their own investment house. Fund managers can strengthen the gender diversity of their own teams, firstly, for example, by setting clear leadership targets or building a respectful workplace culture or making other public commitments to gender diversity. And the IFC have developed a framework that we reference in this slide that includes a few different strategies. So they talk on designing a gender smart investment strategy, engaging, training, and rewarding people within the firm, enhancing or adapting investment processes and systems, and also identifying and collaborating with partners and external stakeholders at the firm level. Then at the portfolio level, fund managers can adopt strategies in both origination and portfolio management. So these strategies enable fund managers to allocate capital to companies that are committed to the 5 key areas that you see on your screen. And those are women's representation in leadership, so either as founders, co-founders, or senior management, depending on the nature of the business. A gender-diverse and equitable workforce, kind of self-explanatory. A gender-inclusive value chain. Offering and designing products and services that consider the distinct needs of women. And finally, in ensuring that their operations do no harm to women in the community as well. So the good news is that as the benefits of gender diversity have become widely recognised, investor demand for gender smart investment opportunities has increased considerably. So this has led to the emergence of a variety of gender-focused financial products across asset classes. So to give a brief overview of the investment universe, let's take a look here at how investment can be channeled towards gender equality and gender smart investments. So on the left-hand side, we can see that there are a few different buckets in terms of the financial products that can be used to direct financial flows towards gender equality. So this can include equity-based financial products, debt or fixed income products, and then also funds, which can also be either debt or equity-based. And on the right-hand side, we can see that the investors accessing these financial products also vary. So we're seeing both retail or individual investors, as well as institutional investors making use of these financial vehicles. And that's really important to note, that difference in investors, because they'll have different needs and expectations, which can lead to a diversity of products to meet those different needs. So we'll look now at what that looks like in practice by diving into a bit more detail with some case studies that can shed some light on how this is working in practice. So our first example is building on what we talked about in our last session about how climate and gender benefits can coexist. So this example comes from Gold Standard, which is an organisation established in 2003 by the WWF and other international NGOs to ensure that projects that reduced carbon emissions featured the highest level of environmental integrity and also contributed to sustainable development. And this case study looks at the Lango Safe Water Project in Uganda. And so the Lango Safe Water Project received the first ever Gold Standard Gender Responsive certification in 2020. The project rehabilitates boreholes to provide clean water in rural Uganda and offers purchasers the option to choose carbon credits from a project which has been rigorously assessed to reduce gender equality. And so the project benefits here are both climate and social, with 50,000 tonnes of carbon reductions per year, 40,000 individuals enjoying greater access to clean water, which reduces incidences of waterborne disease. And as a result of that, we're seeing 4 hours per week saved per household from reduced water collection needs, and in turn reduced school absenteeism due to less exposure to waterborne diseases or time spent collecting water. If we zone in a little further into the gender equality impact, the project also reports that the local Water Resources Committee is now getting close to parity, with 46% women representation on that committee. Reported incidences of domestic violence related to water collection have dropped to 0, and compared to 35% at the project start. And 100% of the surveyed water users spend the time saved on domestic work or other income generating activities, or even social and leisure as well. So this is obviously great from an equality perspective to have that time back. It's also important to note that the gold standard has two different levels of gender analysis when it certifies projects, one that's mandatory and one that's voluntary. So on the mandatory front, all projects have to have a gender sensitivity status. In addition to that, they have the option of becoming gender responsive, which requires further analysis and setting of gender-related goals and targets. Great. So I see we're just a little over time at this point, so I will leave the second example in the materials for you to refer to in more detail. And there's another example here, which you can review from the IFC relating to their gender bond. So I definitely recommend checking out these resources in the handout materials and following the links as well. But in the interest of time, I'll keep us moving along and hand over to Landon, who's going to dig a bit deeper into investment in gender bonds. Thanks.
Absolutely, thank you. So with that, let's have a deeper look at this type of bond and what that can mean. So naturally, you may wonder, what are gender bonds if you're not familiar with them yet? So to get us started, I wanted to introduce broadly where the focus of these bonds sits. And Paul from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange will give us more detail on this in a moment. But for now, let's cover the basics. So as you can see here, gender-focused bonds are a subset of bonds within the green, social, and sustainability bond universe. So another diagram where you can see where they fit in. And gender bonds are often not seen as a category of bonds themselves, like we see with green bonds on the left-hand side. But increasingly, we're seeing bonds have a gender focus, either by setting distinct KPIs related to gender or linked to projects that support or enhance gender equality. What I want to highlight here is we can also see a distinct overlapping with green bonds for climate and gender co-benefits, which we heard a bit about in our case studies. But as Fiona noted, we don't quite have enough time for all of them, so please feel free to review those as well. Now, if we take a look at the debt markets, we can see here that there's been significant growth in sustainable finance through social bonds. This data, which is taken again from the UNCTAD World Investment Report 2023, shows that global issuance of sustainable bonds surpassed 1 trillion in 2021. Although we see a decline in 2022, this was found to be in line with the broader bond market. So it's clear that social and mixed sustainability bonds remain on a long-term growth trajectory with nearly a 14-fold increase in annual issuance from just 2017 to 2022. Well, many of you are likely familiar with green bonds. It's important to note that specifically since 2020, we have seen a significant growth in social bonds and mixed bonds, which includes bonds with those gender-related objectives. So with that, there's a number of guidelines to help us determine what actually qualifies as a gender bond. Importantly, these guidelines are useful whether we're the issuer of such a bond or an investor looking at investing in bonds that contribute to real gender equality impacts. You can see two examples of these on the screen: the social bond principles, which provide guidelines for issuing social bonds, and the climate bonds initiatives methodology to determine whether to include a bond in its social and sustainability bond database. What I think is most important about these guidelines is that they help to build trust in the market and ensure that these social bonds are designed to achieve their intended positive outcomes. So it's not enough to just call something a gender-focused bond. We need to understand the intended impact and whether or not that impact is being achieved. So with a brief introduction to this topic, I'd like to now turn it over to our guest speaker from Luxembourg Stock Exchange, and Paul, let you take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Landon, and I hope my voice is quite clear. Just give me a sign if it's not the case. I'm very happy being with you today, and thank you, the UNSSE, for inviting us to be speakers during this interesting session. I will share my slides and we can take from there. I hope you can see my slides. If it's not, just let me know. So
Yep,
who we
all
are
good.
and perfect. Thank you, Landon. So my name is Paul Shaheen, and I work as a sustainable finance manager at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, and more precisely at the Luxembourg Green Exchange. I'm sure that most of you have heard of us, but why we're here today in this specific topic, because a couple of years ago, actually, we started a journey in order to contribute to promoting gender equality through capital markets and through precisely what we call at the Luxembourg Green Exchange the gender-focused bonds, and we will understand better why we call them gender-focused and not only gender. But let me go back to what Landon has mentioned already of having a couple of materials in the market actually to guide issuers or potential issuers of these type of debt instruments on how to do this. Maybe you have looked already at this very interesting document that was produced by the ICMA and IFC and UN Women on how to use bonds in general to bridge the gender gap. It provided a lot of guidance actually for both sides, for issuers of the debt instruments, but also to investors in order to increase also the demand on this type of instrument. So I highly recommend you to have a look at. It's one of the main references actually for current issuers of gender or gender-focused bonds actually when they go into this type of issuances. Now, Landon has mentioned that gender bonds or the gender-focused bonds are a sub-theme of the actual social and sustainability bonds. And we at the Luxembourg Green Exchange actually went a little bit further, and we tried to see based on what we can qualify a social bond or a sustainability bond to be a gender-focused bond. So as you know, in this universe, we have what we call the use of proceeds instrument, but we also have the sustainability linked bonds instrument. And we will see later on that also the SLBs can be qualified as gender. But let's focus first on the use of proceeds, so the social and the sustainability bonds. So here we said that if 100% of the proceeds of these bonds or less than 100% of these proceeds were dedicated to gender-related matters, and more precisely to SDG number 5, which is targeting the gender equality, then this instrument can be, in principle, qualified as being gender-focused. Now, as you know, how do we know about this? Where can we find this information? This information comes at pre-issuance in this very famous document that we call the framework, in which issuers should say what is their intention for the use of proceeds. And in a lot of the cases in the market, we see that issuers say in a very clear way in that framework that they will dedicate a certain percentage of the proceeds to woman-related or gender-related, let's say, projects. And remember, here we're talking about use of proceeds, which means that the proceeds should go to dedicated projects or activities. So, and in most of the cases also, we see that the issuers do a mapping for these investments with the SDGs, and SDG number 5 appears also to be one of the SDGs that the issuers intend to contribute to by issuing the bond and by investing the proceeds in those projects. So based on this logic, we can say that social bonds and sustainability bonds, and in some cases even green bonds, as we saw in the previous example in the slides, can contribute partially or 100% to gender-related matters. And from this point of view, we can say that these are gender-focused bonds. Now, as you know, it's not only about the pre-issuance, it's also about the reporting, and this is the most important part, because an issuer can intend that they would like, to label their bond as a gender bond, but the reality comes in the implementation. So we look at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange on the reporting that should come post-issuance to make sure that what the issuers promise to do pre-issuance if they have managed actually to do after issuance or post-issuance or not. And here, as you can imagine, we can also see some differences because not all issuers manage to fulfill actually their commitments. So maybe they said, okay, we want to invest in gender-related, in housing, but at the end they invest only in housing. So there is no gender in that, for instance. Post-issuance reporting is the main document that we look at in order to confirm if the instrument is really a gender-focused instrument or not. And we call it focused because it's not necessarily to have 100% of the proceeds going to gender-related matters. Less than 100% is still okay for the instrument, according to our definitions, to be qualified as a gender-focused bonds. So this is for the use of proceeds, and we see, well, we have seen a couple of examples, so many examples actually, and maybe some of the examples that Landon and Fiona mentioned fit into this category. But we also saw that some SLBs, some sustainability-linked bonds, can also be qualified as gender-focused SLBs. And here it's very simple. If you're aware what is an SLB, SLB is a general corporate purposes bond where the proceeds go to everything. However, there should be a sustainability target to which the issuer has made some commitments. And if this target is gender related, if this target is linked with SDG number 5, then here we can also think about a sustainability linked bond being with a gender focused. So at least one of the targets, which means one of the key performance indicators, should be linked to or should be targeting SDG number 5. Now, with this kind of logic, again, here we look at the reporting, the post-issuance reporting, to make sure that the achievements towards these objectives, which are gender-related, are being made or not being made in order for this instrument to be still qualified as gender-focused bonds. Now, based on these two definitions, we at the Luxembourg Green Exchange on our platform, we provided a dedicated tag to this type of instrument, again, to bring more visibility and more transparency rules to the issuers of those instruments, and at the same time to promote those instruments as one of the ways to promote gender equality and gender finance. Let's stop talking theory and let's see some examples. Here I have a very interesting case study coming from NMB Bank in Tanzania, who issued a gender-focused bond. But in this case, 100% of the proceeds actually went to women-owned businesses in Tanzania. Just to give you a bit of overview about this instrument, and then we can maybe look at the video together. This was a breakthrough, a very innovative instrument issued by NMB in Tanzania in 2023 with a maturity date 2025, so it's only for 2 years. It targeted women, so the beneficiary or the target population was very clear actually in the framework as being a woman. And the gender considerations in the use of proceeds paragraph within the framework was quite clear. Gender inclusion proceeds should go to support micro, small, and medium enterprises owned or controlled by women to boost the new female entrepreneurs also. This is a social bond, as we can imagine, with 100% focus on women-related, which makes it a gender-focused bond or 100% gender-focused bond. It's interesting to see how the investors received this instrument in the market. According to NMB, the instrument was oversubscribed. There was a lot of demand, which shows that there is a lot of interest also in this type of instrument in Tanzania and more broadly in Africa. For us, this bond was listed also on the Luxembourg Stock Exchange and on the Luxembourg Green Exchange, and was the first gender bond issued in sub-Saharan Africa, and it gained a lot of attraction. But it's not the only one, because NMB moved to issuing another actually bond with gender focused, which proved again the interest from the investors in the market. Maybe we can play the video. I will try, but in order not to waste any time, if Landon, you can play it from your side, maybe that would save us some time because usually it doesn't work here. I don't know if this is
Yes,
possible.
no problem, Paul. Just give me 1 second. I'll pull that up.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'll stop maybe sharing.
Okay, just let me know if there's no sound, please.
Yes, I can't hear the sound.
Okay, 1 second. Try that again.
It's a commercial bank, universal commercial bank,
Perfect.
based in
Works well.
Tanzania, East Africa, that serves retail clients, corporate clients, and governments. I'm the treasurer for the bank, so main responsibility really is around mobilizing funds, so liquidity management, foreign exchange risk management, interest risk management, and coordination, just to make sure that there's balance sheet optimization and as well as capital allocation. So our gender bond really is a use of proceeds bond, that we issued in line with the international capital markets principles under the social bonds framework that allows us to raise money from the public and finance, women-owned businesses or enterprises that are dominantly owned by women, or businesses whose products and services actually eventually, service the female. Women proposition is a very important segment for our bank. And yes, we had a very fantastic proposition for women's savings, but we realized on the financing side, we needed to do something to mobilize additional funding to support growth for women-owned businesses. So we felt it was necessary for us, because a strategic fit for us is really to diversify portfolio. And given the risk profile of women as far as loans is concerned, we realized that the non-performing loans ratios are actually lower than that of the male counterparts. Yes, so the projects we tend to finance, or that we're financing with these, are predominantly female-owned enterprises, and it cuts across different sectors, be it renewable energy, agriculture, health, education, and manufacturing as well. Obviously, it would be interesting that we measure the number of new loans that are issued to MSCs, so micro to medium and small enterprises women. But also it would be interesting for us, and we're doing that, to measure what impact that is having on their social and economic life. So how many jobs are created? Are they growing? Are they not? Are they expanding their businesses? I think those kind of metrics are very important, and it's part of our KPIs in ensuring that these funds actually put to the right use. Indeed, we've issued other types of bonds, retail bonds, corporate bonds. The difference with this gender bond is that the use of proceeds requires a lot of transparency. Investors require that you go back to them to tell them, how these funds have been used. But in addition to that, it has to go in line with, the social bond principles and in line with the international capital markets, principle on social bonds. As opposed to the other bonds that you could simply raise and finance all manner of activities, without accountability to the investors. This requires significant accountability and transparency as far as investors are concerned. It was very well received by investors, domestic investors, and as well as international investors. As a matter of fact, it got 197% oversubscription. So we had significant appetite seeing from international financiers, but as well as domestic retail and corporate investors. I think one obvious one was the misconception. that you have a gender bond in the market, financing women, and therefore there was a perception that perhaps the bond subscribers were meant to be female. And so it requires a lot of effort, marketing efforts, to ensure that the male counterparts actually understood that it's not just for female, but they could also invest to help advance female. So that was a key challenge for us. But the other one is obviously data quality, especially in some of these emerging markets, still remains to be an issue. So you need to capture the right data at onboarding stage becomes very important, because you really get to realize how critical that is when you're doing your impact measurement and reporting. But the other aspect is the opportunities are still huge. The financing gap for female generally is still quite huge, and that is why there's need for us perhaps also to consider scaling up, such insurances, going forward. Yes, just related to the previous question. So we realize we need to do more still, so certainly we need to raise more funding, be it domestically, be it partnering with DFIs or developing financial institutions, to just make sure that we can scale up, that portfolio. The need is there. I think we need to answer a very critical question of affordability, which keeps coming up, and hopefully using things like guarantee schemes from some of these development financial institutions will enable us actually affordably extend credit to female entrepreneurs. I think critical for me, again, back to what I've said, is data, at the onboarding stage. You need to get it right. But at the same time, just ensuring that indeed you have a pipeline sufficient enough to be covered whatever amount of bonds you want to raise, because ultimately investors demand, that level of transparency and accountability to see that these bonds are actually put to the intended use.
Thank you so much, Landon, for sharing the video. Perfect. I still have maybe one slide to share with the participants. So that was a concrete example of what we call the gender-focused bonds. That it was a pioneer. You have listened to the story. It's an incredible story coming from Tanzania. And just to give you another maybe example on an SLB, a sustainability-linked bond that was also and is still qualified as a gender-focused SLB, is this one coming from another issuer, Equity AB Group from Sweden, who raised 500 million euro in an SLB format. The bond is also listed similar to Tanzania one on the Luxembourg Stock Exchange and on the Luxembourg Green Exchange. And the most important part of it is the fact that targets actually woman-related. So we can see that one of the sustainability performance target are women investment advisory professionals, to increase that percentage to 28% compared to 21% in 2020, and the having woman independent board members appointed at a certain portfolio, at certain companies of the equities portfolio, to increase also to 36% by 2026 compared to 21% in 2020. So as you can see, these two targets are gender-related or woman-related, which qualify, again, the bond to be considered as a gender-focused bond. Well, again, I don't need to maybe say anything about the investors' reaction towards these type of instruments. There is a big demand. There is always an oversubscription, not only for gender bonds, but to all thematic bonds, as some of you might know. And the interesting maybe part also when it comes to SLB, which we don't see in the use of proceeds bonds, is how material the targets should be for the issuer. And this was the case actually to a company in the private sector like Equity Group. The targets that they chose were very relevant to their business and to their transition and to their, let's say, journey towards improving the gender diversity. And this is all what I wanted to share with you today about this. These slides are part of a broader study that we published around the gender-focused bonds, and hopefully we will be updating it next year. So if you would like to have access to it, just go on our website and you would see all the slides and all the study, very complete one you can look at. And I will stop here and I will hand over to Landon again. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for having us as speaker.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Paul. Some great insight to how this works in practice. With that, let's move to wrapping up this unit and talk a bit more about how we can see gender equality themed products being promoted in the market more generally. At the SSC, we did an assessment of how exchanges are working with their markets to enhance gender equality as part of our guidance for exchanges in this topic. And we found that there are two main ways that markets are promoting gender equality. That is through one, the promotion of participation, and two, the promotion of impact. So let's go through both briefly. What do we mean by promoting participation in markets? Well, on both the supply side and the buy side, we're seeing the application of a gender lens in global markets to access unserved segments of the market. And on the sell side, we see markets promoting and supporting women-led businesses or female entrepreneurs. For example, Sourcing to Equal is an IFC-led initiative in partnership with the Women's Entrepreneur Finance Initiative and Norway that aims to connect 5,000 women entrepreneurs to new markets via corporate procurement. On the buy side, we can see the investment in and support of women traders. This relates back to when we discussed earlier the different gender lens investment strategies as being both not just at the portfolio level, but also within the investment firms. This is because it has been well documented that all male investment teams indeed invest in fewer women-led businesses. One example of this type of promotion is an annual women-focused investment summit run by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange called the JSE She Invest Summit. In addition to providing a networking opportunity, the event covers a variety of topics, including basic finance and investment literacy, as well as showcasing different ways in which women can invest in the market. In addition to promoting gender equal participation in markets, we also saw in our study that exchanges and markets promote financial products and companies based on their impact or their ability to actually improve gender equality, either within an organization or in society more broadly. Here we're seeing markets raise awareness of financial products and promote listed products through awards or incentives with the objectives of shining a spotlight on those that are having a positive impact. We also see markets creating segments or indices that aim to make it easier to find and invest in these high impact stocks or financial products. Well, we've heard a lot about the different indices already. I think it's important to note that one index can indeed vary from another. So as you can see here, and as we've heard, in order to truly capture the holistic picture, which we know from our session last week is important, we need to look at this topic from many different perspectives. So for example, if these indices were only collecting data on women on boards, this would, of course, only let us know one aspect or one data point of gender equality within a company. Well, in some instances, this is what we want to know, but if we're investing with the objective of either directing capital towards companies that enhance gender equality related goals in society and their companies, or because we understand the value of enhanced gender equality, like we discussed previously, then we will want much more breadth of data and many more data points. However, what you will notice is that the categories will be quite similar. So you can use these categories to make sure that you're collecting a broad enough data across the board. And as we learned last time, sometimes we can think we're solving a problem or improving gender equality, but actually we can make it worse or stagnant. The best way to prevent that is through thoroughly understanding what's happening in your organization. With that, let's do a quick Zoom poll. So the poll on your screen gives you a few options. Let us know what you think are the reasons that investors looking for gender-related opportunities, and you can select more than one answer, so any that you believe are correct. So do you think it's higher financial performance, to access untapped markets, to enhance climate-related impacts of investments, to prevent men from accessing leadership positions, or to diversify their portfolios. Give you a few seconds to input your answers there. Okay, we'll end it there. So well done, everyone. So everything except, sorry, I'll end the poll there and share the results so everyone can see them. So lots of individuals, we selected higher financial performance, untapped markets, climate-related impacts, and diversifying their portfolios. So all except the fourth answer of preventing men from accessing leadership positions is correct. So well done, everyone. I don't think, yeah, no one selected that answer. So well done. So, while gender-based investing can often be seen as a zero-sum game, preventing men from moving forward so that women can instead advance, gender lens investing is not meant for this. And if that's the outcome, then it's being done wrong. So with that, I want to give everyone a few minutes. We're at our halfway point here now in our session. So please take a moment to grab a tea, take a quick stretch, and we'll be back up again soon in just 5 minutes when the timer finishes. Thank you, and we'll see you again soon.
welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed a nice quick break then to refresh slightly before we move into the next segment. You know, it's always nice to grab a cup of tea or stretch the legs. So moving on, our next element we're going to be talking about is to look at some of, we've looked at financial instruments on gender equality, and now what we'll be looking at is how organizations can communicate their performance on gender equality, which could be one means of accessing those gender-specific finance mechanisms, of course. So it's not only important for communicating with investors your impact, but also internal communication is key to ensure that the culture change that we repeated many times in our session last week as a necessary aspect of performance actually takes place. So we'll be looking at both aspects of communication in that sense. So there's two main segments aligned to that we'll be talking about. So transparency with internal stakeholders, particularly employees, and then external stakeholders as well. So if we start with internal stakeholders, let's look at how we can manage that effectively. So there are many methods to use enhancing gender equality within your transparency in your organization. So what we want to highlight today is that a gender equality action plan is a great tool for communicating with internal stakeholders. So to guide us on this, our colleague at UN Women, Maya, I believe, will be discussing how the women's empowerment principles can be used in action for this purpose. So I'll hand over to Maya there to take over on that part. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona. So good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to see all of you again. And in this session, I will present to you a way to use the webs to advance gender equality and women's empowerment through developing an effective gender action plan. So this will lead your company's gender equality journey by being communicative and transparent. So a gender action plan is a roadmap for implementing gender equality and women's empowerment. It helps companies embed gender equality into its business model and contains a coalition of goals, indicators, and targets. And as a result, your company will be more effectively and successfully advancing gender equality. So the basic idea of the Gender Action Plan is that the company corrects past and present forms of inequality, prevents any future reoccurrence of discrimination and bias, and ensure that all company strategies, policies, and programs and activities are gender responsive and transformative. So this develops and deepens the understanding of gender equality among all stakeholders within and outside the organization, and also tracks progress in real time to assess where you stand on gender equality. So a gender action plan must include clear goals and targets. Take into consideration findings from surveys and interviews with key stakeholders, as well as HR data, and as well consider risks, challenges, and opportunities that may occur during the implementation process, and include concrete and measurable actions. And now we can go to the next slide on how to create an effective gender action plan. So here are some steps. The first one is to really set clear goals for yourselves to identify the objectives that align with your company's vision using the Web 7 principles as your guide, but your own vision for your company really needs to lead where your action plan and how it will be built. And then to develop activities to plan concrete measures and actions to achieve your goals. And here the WEPS also offers resources as a step-to-step guide. And then to establish some baseline by gathering data to assess your starting point. So for an inclusive workplace, for example, you can review current recruitment policies. Are job titles gender neutral? Does the language avoid gender bias? And if you're searching to do an inclusive supply chain, you can check your procurement policies. Do you prioritize women-owned or gender-responsive businesses in your procurement and down the supply chain? And then to set targets and timelines to really differentiate between your broader goals and your specific targets. So this will help you to really implement your gender action plan. So here a goal defines the objective, while a target is the measurable indicator. So an example of this is if your goal is to create an inclusive workplace, a target could be to have 40% women representation in senior management. And if focusing on the supply chain, we could set a target to procure from a specific number of gender responsive companies. So here you want to aim for achievable yet ambitious target, and also to have a time frame. And the last step is to assign your accountability. So here you need to appoint someone responsible to kind of own the process and monitor the progress and build on the outcomes as well. And now we can go to the next slide, which is about key considerations when setting the goals. So you need to make sure that your goals have clear and measurable outcomes. You need to evaluate if the goal is realistically achievable, given the resources and constraint that you have within your company. And then the relevance to your organization will be important. So you have to ask yourself, how important is this goal to the organization? You need to assess the relevance according to internal stakeholders, especially the middle management. We've seen many times where senior management has some priorities, middle management has a different set of priorities, and then the workforce another set. So it's important that it all comes together and that it will make sense for everybody. So that you don't have this gap between what people prioritize within your organization. And then to set a timeline for the achievement, you need to have the timeline that is clear to reach the goal, and also to consult with your relevant stakeholders through surveys, group meetings, and consultations as well. And some recommended actions to make sure that it's effective is to secure the CEO commitment and leadership, to form a diverse team to drive gender equality within your company, and to integrate gender equality into your business model, and also to align the goals with your company's value and proposition and vision. So, and then you also need to develop the targeted questions for stakeholders consultations to identify your gaps and your opportunities. And finally, to set deadlines to finalize and present the action plan to the CEO and the executive team. And we can take the next slide. So when the WEPS plan is in action, the internal consultation and communication will be key. So once it's finalized, you need to have regular communication with the employees and the stakeholders to ensure everyone is aware of the action plan, the related activities, and the progress being made. You should also gather data on the progress and share updates through internal and external channels, such as your annual corporate sustainability reports and so on. This can also be done from the WEPS website. And you need to set effective target indicators. So for this, you can use our transparency and accountability framework. This offers over 70 indicators tailored to your goals. And this really eliminates the need to create the wheel again. You can just have them from this transparency and accountability framework that we already have. And then all the content presented today is from the WEPS learning module on creating a gender action plan. So you can access this module and many additional resources to help you along your journey at weps.org/learn. So I thank you so much for your time, and I really look forward to seeing the impact that your companies will make. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maya. I think that sets an excellent structure for working on that internal communication, as we've talked about there. So with that, we'll move on now to looking at the external side of communications as well. So to kick it off, we're going to do another quick Zoom poll for you to get a sense of how your organizations are currently disclosing gender-related information. So I'll just, oh, thank you, that poll's just come up on your screen there. Yeah, I think what we wanted to get a sense of here is, which vehicles are you using currently externally to disclose gender information? So that could be within CSR reporting, an annual report, perhaps you're required to do a specific gender pay gap or voluntarily choose to. Maybe you do a combination of these activities, or perhaps not something that you are currently doing, which is fine, of course. Good to just know where you're at. And as you're filling that in, do feel free to let us know in the chat as well. What do you think kind of determines where this information should appear? So what are the factors that you're using to decide how to approach gender reporting at the moment? So, for example, maybe you're required to follow certain reporting standards, or maybe you're looking at the GRI, which would kind of have you putting in a sustainability report as relative to the International Sustainability Standards Boards, which would advocate for kind of material information going in the financial report. Thank you, everyone who has voted in that. So I'll end the poll there and just share those results with you. So we can see we've got a little bit of a mix, but the most popular answer appears to be that organisations are currently reporting in their kind of standalone sustainability reports if they're putting this data anywhere. But we do also have a couple of participants who have reported either in a gender pay gap report or are including the information in the annual report as well. So that's just interesting to get a sense from you. Thank you for sharing. Great, so we'll just close that poll. So thinking about that then, what we really want to think about is the audience for this information. So thinking about who you communicate with and defining that clearly will define, of course, where you report that information and what standards you use to do so. So if you're looking to report to an investor audience on these issues, the primary location for your gender-related disclosures would be your annual report. And the International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB, which is part of the IFRS Foundation that you see on the screen there. This organisation has consolidated the major investor-oriented sustainability disclosure standards. And for organisations who are reporting to other stakeholders, you might still use the GRI standards as well, which are widely already used by many organisations. So together, these two approaches form a holistic package which allows you to report on gender-related information to both your investors and also to wider stakeholders. So in terms of the content for each of the types of audience, for investors, you might want to focus your disclosure on financially material risks and opportunities related to gender equality, as well as other information that can help investors in their investment decisions. So as I said, this goes into your annual report alongside your financial statements and your other disclosures. And that really then allows your investors to see this information in a connected way with your overall financial strategy and risk management. So to communicate to a broader stakeholder group, you would potentially want to report more about the impact of your business on society and the economy at large. So in this context, what the impact on your workforce and the wider society is of your gender inclusive practices. And so this will be information that potentially some of your investors might want to know about, but it may be something that you report in a supplementary report, such as a sustainability report, to provide that extra additional detail beyond just the financially material information that your investors want to see in the annual report. And so to go in a little bit further on the IFRS standards, which I mentioned before, so these are the IFRS Sustainability Standards Board standards, or ISSB, to throw another acronym around, I know. So these or disclosures require your organisation to report on sustainability-related risks and opportunities in 4 broad areas. If you have reported against the TCFD, or Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure Recommendations, you may be familiar with this structure of those 4 themes, which are drawn from that reporting requirement. So the ISSB S1 standard requires companies to disclose information about all of their sustainability-related risks or opportunities, focusing on those that can be reasonably expected to affect entities' cash flows, so its access to finance, its cost of capital, etc., over both a short, medium, and a long-term time horizon. So although this standard doesn't yet provide specific metrics or disclosure requirements on gender equality per se, it does highlight that companies should make use of the SASB or SASB standards and the GRI standards to identify appropriate disclosures for individual topics. So the standard sets out a general expectation that you should be disclosing on all material risks and opportunities, and then recommends using some of the other thematic topic standards available from SASB and GRI to support that disclosure. So that's definitely worth taking a look at. And then if we look at that second side of reporting, so to your wider stakeholders beyond investors, we went through the GRI standards here and have identified those that most directly address gender equality to help you know where to find the guidance on these issues. So looking across the GRI standards, gender-related disclosures are part of the requirements already on employees, so breaking them out by gender, the governance structure and composition of your leadership and board, again, thinking about women's representation, your policy commitments, and your overall approach to stakeholder engagement. And so you can see the numerical references we have here show you the particular sections of the GRI standards where you can refer to further detail on the particular requirements here. So whilst GRI is currently in a transition to some new modular standards, we can still take some content from their previous guidelines released in 2016. And although these sectoral and topic standards are still being updated, there's still a lot of value, I think, in the content that they already have available. So if you look at the reporting requirements on GRI 405, which is focused on diversity and equal opportunity, and also GRI 406 on non-discrimination, we can see some further additional guidelines that could support you here on gender-related communications. And in both of those guidelines, it's recommended that organizations should report their management approach for diversity and equality, also with reference to the GRI 103 standard on management approach. So it all kind of connects together in that sense. And then a final GRI standard just to reference is the GRI 2021, which will require you to disclose ratios of standard entry-level wage by gender compared to a local minimum wage. So also supports that starting on gender pay reporting as well. So obviously we've looked there at various standards, and I know it's always helpful to have some real world examples of what companies are doing on this. So these examples are just excerpts from actual reports and just present a small piece of their kind of overall reporting. These are examples of current practice, and we're not necessarily passing judgment on them here and saying whether they're good or bad, but they're just intended to provide some color and inspiration for you. So looking at this governance disclosure here from the annual report of Airtel, which is a Nigerian telco company, in line with what the IFRS standards require, they've reported about the processes that they use to monitor, manage, and oversee their sustainability-related performance. And they note that the non-financial KPIs that they have linked to their sustainability strategy do include gender diversity as well. And that actually these KPIs are then linked to their board remuneration, which of course is always a strong incentive to make sure that the board and that tone from the top is set to take action on these issues. So moving to an example from the strategy component, this can really help your audience to understand how you're managing those different risks and opportunities that you may face. So here we see from Astra International's annual report, which is an Indonesian conglomerate, the importance of diversity for its employees coming through. So this is backed up by a statement where they have a roadmap of actions to manage the opportunity they see from a diverse workforce. And in other parts of their reporting that you can access at the link in the slides, they go into more detail about how they're implementing this. So for example, they have a program to make the workplace more suitable for women. And they also have a women development program, which is particularly focused on preparing women for leadership positions. And interestingly, they say in their human capital development focus areas that they are kind of building an agile organization, they're developing passionate and energetic leaders so as to be able to navigate the organization in business challenges, as well as to carry out the culture of continuous improvement innovation to maintain their relevancy in an era of disruption. So in other words, they're actually stating here that a more diverse and gender equal business can help them to stay relevant in the future and kind of ensure their strategic resilience. So that's an interesting insight into how they're thinking about these issues. So then turning to risk management, another example we have here is from the Coca-Cola HBC's annual report. And as a reminder, risk management disclosures here are helping users to understand the processes that you use to identify, assess, and prioritize sustainability-related risks and opportunities. So here, Coca-Cola provide an overview of how they're going about this, and they say that they're looking at both the inward impacts through their annual materiality survey, but also investor-driven frameworks such as SASB, looking outwardly at the impacts that they also have from the external environment. And they speak to their investors, their risk management processes, and connect to their climate scenario analysis. And so this also, shows how they're thinking about these issues and how they have, diversity coming through within the matrix there as a sustainability issue that's relevant for them to assess and manage. And then finally, moving to metrics and targets, we have a disclosure example on particularly gender-related metrics used by Cemex, which is a Mexican cement company. So they state in their annual report that they're also a signatory to the UN WEPs as well, and the UNGC's target gender equality. So obviously that's encouraging as a start. And then in this example, we're seeing them update on the progress they're making towards gender equality in their workforce. So obviously Cemex within the materials and built environment industry has potentially been quite a traditionally male-dominated organization, and therefore they are starting from quite a low percentage of women within their company than perhaps you might see in some industries. However, this example shows here that they have set themselves goals to increase the representation of women in senior management. And they say in their base year, they targeted a 30% women's representation by 2030, with 13% at present. So obviously some progress still to make, but it's good that they're setting themselves a more stretching target. And if you look elsewhere in their report as well, they also give kind of more data on the breakdown of their workforce by gender and different positions within the organization as to how many women are represented, and their male to female pay ratios as well by region. So there's some useful transparency that you could consider as some ideas there. Great. So that's hopefully helped to bring to life a little bit of what we were talking about there in terms of the reporting standards. But there are also some additional organisations that you could look at for more guidance on this topic, as well as standards. And this is something, of course, that the UN SSE work on to support as well. And we'll keep putting out some more guidance and analysis in this area as well. So do keep an eye out for that. So here we have some different guiding principles that you could consider. So we have the UN Charter on Human Rights, of course, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and of course, the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, which we've already discussed throughout these sessions. So in addition, it's also important to know beyond those guiding principles, which can be really useful for kind of substance and substantive content. It's also, of course, important to be aware of what legal requirements your organization must face. So definitely checking out the legal reporting requirements is recommended. So beyond this, there's a number of rankings and benchmarks that you could also use to support you in understanding where you're at and where those gaps are that you need to address. So for example, you could look at the work of the World Benchmarking Alliance here. And there are, of course, as well, various different indices and rating agencies that are taking into account social performance. So for example, the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index that we discussed previously with Bloomberg on the session last week. So, looking at how you perform in that, how peers in your industry are performing in that index can give you some ideas about where you're at and where some of your gaps could be. And then, of course, we have management standards as well that you could look at, which can help you to enhance your internal practices in particular and your performance on gender equality. So, for example, here you could consider the ISO 26000 guidance on social responsibility. And there's other ISO standards as well, where gender equality comes through in an integrated way as a theme. And then finally, we also have the SDG impact standards. And these are sort of management practice standards designed to guide businesses and investors to embed sustainability into their decision-making approach. So I have touched on quite a lot of concepts there, but one that we talked about, of course, as well, was around pay ratios between women and men. And so to pick up on that topic in particular, I'd like to now hand over to our guest speaker from Brightmine, Sabina Mahmood. So great to have you with us, Sabina, and it'd be great to hear a bit more on this topic from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Can you see and hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Great. Sorry about that. I've been having some technical components this morning, but thank you for including me in today's call. Great to be on with everyone. I know on our side, many of us have joined these sessions in the past, and really incredible to think about not only the external opportunities to invest in gender equity, but in the segment of the training to focus on internal practices and policies that we can all take back to desks in terms of action. Right, a lot of these high-end stats and legislation move us in the right direction, but thinking practically now about how we transition back to our desks and start progress one step at a time is really my goal to help support some of the programming today. My name is Sabina Mahmood. I sit as the head of market advocacy and education for pay equity, specifically here at Brightmine. My specialty is in the sustainability space, and previously coming from Bloomberg as well, focusing on gender indices. What I really focus on is bridging the gap between pay equity across gender, race, ethnicity, et cetera, and overall workplace equality indicators, including gender equity, representation, pipeline development, et cetera. So what I want to spend just a few minutes today is to think about those first few steps to really bridge that gap from a pay equity perspective. So if we can just move the slides forward, please. Oh. Or I'm happy to share, Fiona, you let me know. I'm happy to share on my end as well, if that's easier.
Yes, I'll just chat with Landon, but I think possibly might be looking for you to share those directly, if that's okay, if you have them available.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
if not, no problem, and I can pull them up as well, Sabina, if you give me a few seconds, but if you have them open, please feel free to share.
I have them open, no problem at all.
Okay, thank you.
Just bear with me 1 second and I'll get us in full screen. Great. So you should be able to see my slides. Like I said, I don't want to spend too much time belaboring statistics on the importance of this effort in terms of both pay equity as well as gender equity, given that you're all in this session and you've spent nearly 2 days focusing on various themes across the space. What I really like to focus in on is those action items that we can all start to think about in terms of self-assessment and taking that first step forward as your own organization. We see the global landscape incredibly advancing in terms of pay equity. The word incredible is advancements is relative in this space. We know progress is moving quite slow in terms of achieving gender pay parity globally and by various markets, as well as incoming legislation across the entire EU and local markets focusing on greater transparency around gender pay gap reporting and equity standards, as well as transparency. So organizations are starting to open their eyes to the transparency component, but more importantly, employees themselves are beginning to ask more questions. And this has a ripple effect on the performance indicators of your organization and ultimately the business impact. So what I'd like to do is just spend a few minutes focusing on a phased approach to pay equity indicators. So thinking about those subsections of the Gender Equality Index that you've heard from last week as well. It's simple. It's meant to be simple because, like I said, we want to focus on those first few steps and not be overwhelmed. The idea of perfection being the enemy of good here. So we want to think about it in 3 phases: pre-assessment to understand where you are in terms of pay equity in the workplace, the assessment itself, tools and technologies we can consider, and post-assessment. Once you've identified gaps, if you've identified gaps, what do you do and how do you manage that? So like any other business impact, what I really want to hone in on these 3 slides is focusing on that top right metrics and key performance indicator highlighted box. Now, what's critical for the efforts towards pay equity and broader gender equity practices are the application of measurement. We've talked about this. You've heard the SSE team talk about this over and over again. But ultimately, if we're not creating realistic goals to achieve progress, we will not be able to achieve them. And interestingly, we've held senior level roundtables with chief executives, chief HR officers, et cetera, that focus on this work. They all have public commitments to achieving this, but actually in a group of about 12 CHROs, chief human resource officers, none of them held the sole responsibility for measuring progress, just setting the standards, right? So that's automatically a lag in that accountability piece. So the pre-assessment phase is to really understand what impact pay equity has on the organization, right? 24% of HR professionals report that lack of a clear job architecture and job leveling frameworks stand in their way of progress in achieving pay equity. Now, this begins with the data piece, right? So understanding how much information do we have on our local employees as well as our global employees from a data readiness perspective, gender identifiers, pay bands, and pay philosophies. So thinking about analyses in that way and how we can organize that information to compare equal pay for equal value work across our employees. We also want to understand our motivations and objectives. So thinking about the impact of regulation as likely the key business driver or the most relevant from a compliance standpoint to start. But what are your intended outcomes, right? This cannot just be board level initiatives or senior executive level initiatives. Each manager within the firm that has a direct report or is communicating this type of information should be involved or at least understand how pay is determined and the intended outcome of this effort. Stakeholder alignment, like any other business objective, and comparison groups, right? So a clear articulation of jobs of equal value across your workforce. I know that SSE also has resources in connection with the Equal Pay International Coalition that works quite closely in this space to help with guidance on that valuation as well. The second piece, and arguably what we've seen as the most challenging or biggest barrier for people to simply get started in pay equity work is the assessment itself. So from a data aggregation perspective, we know the nuances can be quite cumbersome. Different Excel files and living in different regions of the organization. Personal identifier information creates challenges as well that we want to make sure that we're accounting for. But beyond that phase, the assessment itself is complex. Thinking about pay gap reporting, as well as increasing transparency reporting requirements incoming. So the good thing is in terms of the themes of this subsection of the training, is that there are tools and technologies to help support that, right? Pay equity analytics is one offered by Brightmind, which is our organization focusing on identifying those root causes of pay differences for the purpose of overcoming any gaps. But we are not the only ones, right? So I encourage everyone to either ask questions today or reach out, and happy to share some materials on identifying the right tool for your organization based on where you are. The complexities of pay analysis stand as the greatest barrier of progress, right? So when we think about the assessment itself, we want to determine pay gap ranges that are feasible and goals. Remediation timeline. If we find gaps across our employee base, whether it's based on gender, race, ethnicity, etc., what will it take to correct that, as well as compliance and reporting requirements? I layered in the prioritization piece of this fourth pillar here, and actually I think that's the greatest take home from this slide itself, right? So once you've identified the tool and technology that's right for you, you've identified gaps, now what? Realistically, for organizations of your size and scale, closing those gaps overnight will not happen. And this is not a one and done exercise. So what's really important from a measurement perspective is understanding your budget and priorities of remediation as well, starting first and foremost from a compliance perspective, making sure you're abiding by global law, but ultimately, what are the incremental steps you will take not only to close the gaps you might find, but also to sustain that over time, right? Pay equity itself and pay gap reporting is not a one and done exercise, because we know it is at risk to change with any change in hire as well. From an assessment perspective, what we want to also think about fundamentally is root cause analysis. And this is actually where we see that stakeholder alignment piece come in quite significantly, because if we can identify where there are root causes of pay discrepancies across employees, then that helps us to start to hypothesize policies and practices we can adjust to overcome them over time. So thinking about scenario planning, etc. And lastly, in the post-assessment phase, you've identified gaps, now what? Or perhaps you have not identified gaps, but you want to make sure that you're moving forward in the right way. So from a metric and key performance indicator here in that top right corner, we want to think about those immediate remediation needs, like I said, and allow for that prioritization. And then track efficacy of any policy changes if you've identified a practice in place that could be responsible for introducing pay discrepancies in the organization. This could also include representation goals, right? We talked a lot about pipeline development and thinking about gender equity across those revenue generating functions. So it's one thing to say we have a 50%, assuming the binary classifications, we have a 50% female workforce, 50% male workforce. But if we hone in from a pay equity perspective and identify that those significant group of women is actually the lowest paid intervals, or in functions that don't have a clear trajectory to move up in the employee pipeline, well, that's not necessarily achieving the equity that we are hoping to, right? It's a numbers game as opposed to in practice really offering equal opportunity for everyone to succeed. So lastly, we want to think about the last two pillars here, communication and sustainability. The communication piece is critical, not only for your organization's senior leaders who are responsible for determining pay philosophies and pay practices, but thinking about change management and communication for your employees itself. This fundamentally underscores the business impact pay equity has on your organization, right? Employees that feel involved, employees that have a clear understanding of pay decision making, how they can move up, what skills they need to develop to do so, will drive greater returns for your organization, right? So without a clear line of communication, those employees themselves, they're not talking to your chief executive officers every day. They're not talking to whoever runs your compensation planning every day. Who they are talking to are their line managers, their direct senior reports, things of that nature, people of that nature. So it's important we arm them with all of the information helpful to communicate effectively and respectfully. Now, I add the caveat that it doesn't mean you need to air everything about all of your pay practices and all of the components and everything you plan to remediate with the general audience, right? What we're asking for is a mindful communication that helps with career progression, change management, and a clear understanding of pay fairness within the organization. And by applying those metrics and KPIs at each of these phases, we can then determine a personalized approach to sustaining and scaling progress, right? Checking against those indicators, publicly reporting this information to help hold ourselves accountable, etc. And ultimately, we will see that it has a significant impact on the organization overall. I like to share this just as a closing slide as we think about, this is a US specific example, but this actually can be applied across Swiss markets, across the global markets. The time it takes for an employee to catch up in their life cycle, right? In this case, we have a male and female starting salary at the global pay gap at 82%. And even in the case where the female is outperforming her male counterpart, receiving greater performance reviews, receiving greater merit increases, it will still take nearly 30 years for that employee to catch up to their peers' salary, assuming every life decision has been the same, which we know is not the case. So when you think about the importance of those incremental steps, it's really identifying what this means for individuals and how we can impact, create the greatest impact based on that. I'm happy to pass it back to you, Landon, on the SSE side. Of course, any questions or resources, happy to share. So thinking through practical steps, action items, spots we want to really allow you to take back to desk. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Sabina. That was a really, really useful overview. We are a little ahead of time, actually. So if you're happy to stay on for a minute or two, a couple of questions maybe I could ask you just for a bit of discussion. So sure, thanks. I guess firstly, obviously we've talked quite a lot about the specific topic of gender in the context of diversity today, but obviously, as we all know, this is very much interrelated with other aspects of diversity in terms of age, race, economic background, etc. Be really interesting to know how kind of at Brightmind you make sense of that interconnectedness and think of gender in that context.
Absolutely. Great question. Thank you. I'm mindful too, it's a weighty subject to cover in just a few slides, so I appreciate the question. But ultimately at Brightmind, we focus on identifying potential root causes of pay differences. Now, this can be associated with a protected characteristic, right? It could be a blatant case of discrimination. More often than not, it is not a blatant case of discrimination, which is a positive, but rather a combination or piling up of systemic biases in the past that perhaps have just surmounted over time. So with the tool itself, we allow organizations to input their own organizational data, right? So if they're looking across gender, that's most typically where we see organizations begin. They can also now analyze all this information across any protected characteristic. So you can further layer in age, tenure in the organization, race, ethnicity, ability, etc. As a jumping off point. It is not, we need to start with gender from an analysis perspective, but of course, the more information, the better in helping to identify that. So it's using statistical regression to identify from a numerical standpoint, those potential root causes. Now, if you're able to identify those key indicators that impact differences in pay, that actually helps you then hone in on fixing that, right? That clear foundation component. So say, for example, you identify a significant gap across specifically one team within the sales function, you can now then look at behaviors in those scenarios, whether it's merit, performance, etc., that might be impacting those. So the goal is really to identify those fundamental root causes for the purpose of overcoming them across any protected and even non-protected characteristic, right?
Absolutely. No, thank you for sharing a little bit more there. That's super helpful, and I think yeah, as you say, brings to life the complexities of getting into the data on this, but as you say, starting with the key metrics and building out your understanding from there. So thanks so much again for sharing with us. Brilliant. So we'll move on now, if that's okay. We have a couple of chat comments that have come through whilst we've been talking. So as we have a little time, I did want to draw on Tiffany, if that was okay, on the stock exchange listing point, because unfortunately, as I mentioned, Paul had to leave us after his speaking slot. But I know Tiffany has done plenty of analysis on this topic across our different exchange groups. So yeah, maybe Tiffany, if you might say a few words on that point, that'd be great.
Oops, sorry, I was muted. Thanks, Fiona. I think it's a really good point, actually. Thanks for that question. And too bad Paul's not here to talk about it a little bit more, because he would add a lot of color to that. But, it's very interesting when you look at the requirements of bonds in particular, and who's listing those bonds, who are the companies behind the bonds. So we're increasingly seeing kind of having that connected to bonds. But as Paul was kind of sharing in his presentation, it really depends on the type of bond as to how you're analyzing that particular area. So if we're looking at, for example, a sustainability linked bond, an SLB, as he was referring to it earlier, then we are mostly looking at certain KPIs that particular issuer has set, certain targets they're trying to reach. And that's how we decide whether it's sustainable or not. And we use those targets for achievement. So it could be any company then that's listing that bond. Now, of course, in order to achieve these targets, we often see things integrated like no harm also. So we looked at carbon credits before too, and how we can see that sometimes we're getting involved in carbon credits with a gender perspective. We also looked at how those might be rated by company or by like the rating agencies. So even though any company can list these things, often there's also kind of caveats where they can't be, doing something really good over here, but then doing harm to the same area in another space. But that really depends on how it's set, kind of what the requirements are. And for Luxembourg Stock Exchange in particular, I don't think they have, and I'd have to look further into detail into that. I don't think they have anything related to do no harm, but they do have certain criteria of what constitutes, for example, a sustainability linked bond. I hope that makes that question clear. I've forgotten now who it was. I think it was Akshat. So if there's anything more you want to know, you can just let us know.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Tiffany. That's super helpful. I did link as well to, I hope I'm not dropping us in it if our page isn't 100% up to date, but our overview that we have on Lux SE on our website as well, just providing a summary of their requirements as a starter. Brilliant. So, and then also I think we had a couple of bits of discussion in the chat around the ISSB standards. So yeah, as we mentioned, there isn't kind of particular guidance or template relating to gender equality yet. If we can share, if we haven't already done so, the link in the chat, thank you, Tiffany, to some of the work that the ISSB are doing on their kind of foundational standards, S1, which is sustainability related kind of risks and opportunities in general. A lot of the principles from that standard, I think, can support you in getting started, but we should see a more specific topic standard forthcoming, I believe. Brilliant. And thanks everyone for those questions. So as we come towards the end of the session, I'd like to invite you just to pop back into the Menti at the link we've shared before for one final time. And it'd be really nice just to wrap up and reflect on where we feel we're at the end of the training in terms of our learning. So I'll just briefly share the screen so we can have a little look at what you think on that point. I see a few people have responded to this already. So yes, these are the same kind of objectives that we set ourselves at the start of the session. I'm just keen to know where you think you're up to against those now we're coming to a close. And thank you. I see, I think we've shifted up the scale there a little bit already, so that's great to see. And yeah, we obviously realize it's the beginning of this journey, but we hope that we've given you a good foundation to build on here, and lots of resources and kind of organizations that you can look to support you in continuing to build on that. Brilliant. So I'll leave that with you to respond on if you haven't already had the chance to do so. And as we wrap up, there's just a few things in our presentation that we wanted to highlight for you to continue to support your learning journey. Great. So as I said, if you look at the slide handouts that will be available from our webpage, this includes all of the resources that we've talked about today and lots of links to access those. Please do also stay tuned in general to our SSE training channel and subscribe to our newsletter to hear more about upcoming training sessions on further topics. And also just a reminder that all of the guest speaker slides will be available from our website, as well as the recording of today's session for you too, if you want to catch up and watch again later. And these are just a summary of some of those resources that you can access per unit, broken into sort of different reports and then the tools. So then finally, we're very grateful for all of you having attended and stayed with us throughout the session today. And as a token of our appreciation for that, we'll be able to send you a completion survey for those who are joining us live online at present. So this is on behalf of ourselves, on behalf of UN Women and Columbia University as well. So to receive the certificate, there's one slight ask of you, if possible. So we have a feedback survey, which we'll be sharing with you a link to in the chat just now. And this will also go out via email to everyone that attended this session live as well. So if you could please complete that survey, if you'd like to receive a certificate, that would be great. Just to note, we typically aim to send those certificates out within 5 working days of receiving your survey. So yeah, just give us a week or so to receive that certificate. And finally, just to end on some final thanks to all of our excellent speakers who have joined us here today. So we had the, of course, UNGC team represented by Iruna, Maya from UN Women, Paul from Luxembourg Stock Exchange, and finally Sabina from Brightmind. So we really appreciate all of our speakers taking the time to join us today. Here they are all again, just in case you needed a reminder. And finally, thank you to our supporters at the UNSC who make this program possible, and to our kind of partners on this particular training, IFC, UN Women, Columbia University and the Government of Luxembourg. And a final thank you to the SIX Swiss Exchange for hosting us today, and of course to yourselves for joining us. We really appreciate the time you've taken and your participation. So best of luck on your organisational journeys on gender equality, and we hope to see you again on a future training session. Thanks very much, everyone.